when you look at Europe, I mean, being in a concentration camp, as you said, is a horrible experience. And I have heard from survivors like experiences that are so unbelievable that people survived, but the tremendous amount of split of experience that was so overwhelming that it created a very strong fragmentation. That's why, for example, here in Israel, like with many Holocaust survivors, it wasn't even possible to do therapy because the fracture in the nervous system, as long as it was held, was okay. But if it led to many suicides, and it was because once it got opened up, it was simply too much. So sometimes it's so terrible that it needs the next generation or the follow-up generation to have enough distance and perspective to create a new intimacy. And the other example was Germany, where after the war, kids grew up. We work also on what is collective trauma conditioning, not family conditioning, but the collective trauma conditioning. So there were many, after the war, many people that grew up in that kind of very creepy silence where you feel something horrible has happened, but the parents didn't orient their children because nobody spoke. So there was for a certain period like a silent period where the people were so muted and also intentionally mute that it was a terrible experience for the people. It was very confusing because what you felt and what you got to know didn't match. And so for us, I think for your question in the trauma work, like the sensing, even with a one person, like if a client comes to us and says, okay, I experience XYZ. For me, it's important to feel how much active energy is still active in the trauma and how much is the narrative. Because if I just listen to the narrative, it might be misguiding. Maybe the person did already a lot of work and the symptoms come from somewhere else. I need to see if the what I feel is in synchronization with what I hear. That's why I need both. I need the cognitive information and the embodied transmission of the person. And both guide me how much is still active. And so I think the same, but it's simply much more complex. That's why we work with large groups that can surface a little bit of the collective trauma, digest it together, and transmute that energy into presence. I often say presence is like a rescue boat, and we bring information of the past into that rescue boat, into the presence, so that the presence grows and there's more integration, there's more health now for creating a better world together. And so that's what we call in our work, we call this post-traumatic learning, that every trauma integration brings a new learning. So there's a lot of frozen information that when liberated appropriately becomes the learning of the society, which is amazing. It's because we often see trauma as a stigmatization, but it's first of all it's an intelligent process. I mean, how our systems deal with overwhelm. Then when we connect to that intelligent function that protected us, we can liberate the past, but we also gain new capacities. And I think that's why trauma work is such a win-win for the person to feel more healthy and more vital and more engaged, but also for the society around.
Mhm. Yeah, let's talk about that a bit. Rewind a little. You were talking about being more empathetic when you do this kind of work, where you can actually have intimacy with other people. I love you gave an example in one of your talks about the reflection of the moon on the water.
Yeah.
Maybe you can go into that. But I also want to ask about people who lack empathy, who cannot feel into other people, and the flip side of it, where people who just feel too much, they feel everything. So they just sort of back off and don't connect.
Yeah. Like feeling to, I often say when the tree's crown is too big, the tree lacks roots. If the crown and the roots are in a balance, even if there is a storm, it's okay, except it's an exceptional storm. But if so people with hypersensitivity often need to work on the deeper grounding of that energy so that the burden can be turned into a capacity. Because what if, like, some of us came into life with a very highly sensitive nervous system, that's true, but some of our parents didn't know how to support it, so kids were often overwhelmed. So that's one version of it. The other version of it is that that me growing up in a family where there's domestic violence, for me to be dialed in and notice every little tiny movement is super important to save myself in the right moment. So some people's actually trauma created a tremendous capacity to feel others, but without like a core that is open and can process that information, because the core is frozen, because there's a lot of fear and panic and terror. So when somebody says my sensitivity is a burden, I'm always interested, okay, where can we resource the system more, or where do we need to work so that there is a different regulation, and the sensitivity is not the problem. The processing of that information is the issue. And why it has been so overdeveloped, I mean, that's what we need to look at as well. When somebody is not empathic, not feeling is the same. It was an intelligent function. That's why I often say I don't like so much assessment tools that put people into strength and weakness, because we perpetuate the same split. Because usually, even if we are very conscious, we still try to get rid of our weakness and try to be strong. To really be able to see that my defense mechanisms, all my defense mechanisms, were and are intelligent processes and functions that served me more than without them. So if a child grows up in a family where is domestic violence, to develop that hypersensitivity and freeze part of one's inner, or freeze part of one's inner empathy, saved the child's life more than without it. And then as a grown up, I either say, oh, I feel too much, or I say, I can't feel other people. But that function is not a dysfunction. It's a function that makes sense in the person's development. And when we touch what makes sense, first of all, it's deeply empowering because I connect to my creativity. I was very creative as a child to do that. It's not that I did that because I can't do it. Yeah, often people that got traumatized, they are very withdrawn in some parts of themselves. That withdrawal movement is super intelligent. In a family where the parents were always fighting and the child was terrified, to go into an inner cave and be in one's imagination to forget the noise in the family was highly intelligent. Today it looks like a problem for the grown-up person, and we stigmatize ourselves often that we are not functional. And so we explore a lot what's the intelligence in your defense mechanism, and how can we re-own that as a creative process? Because that's the only way how I can come in contact and open that room again, because it's me. It's an action that I do, but I forgot how. So where's the light switch in the room to turn on the light again so that the room illuminates again, and then I can feel how I do it, and then I can let it go. Because one example, for example, when somebody has an argument with the intimate partner, and then they say, oh, my heart is very tight or closed. So who closed the heart? We often say, oh, my throat is tight. Yeah, but who made it tight? The tightening is not in my awareness. I just feel the effect of feeling tight. So somebody said something to me, and in a millisecond, I feel tight. That tightness is there all the time. It didn't happen just in that moment. That moment just highlights it. So I think we can learn techniques or ways of healing by relating to the intelligence of those processes. And it's amazing. It's amazing when a person gets in touch with the intelligence of the defense mechanism. That's the moment of reowning, and then usually people can let them go anyway, because today they are grown-ups, they don't need this anymore. There are other ways how we can deal with it. But if that's just a mental idea, oh, I can let it go because I don't need it anymore, it won't move an inch, because it's just an idea. It's not me becoming aware. Becoming aware is in my nervous system, is in my body, it's in my emotional experience. So, and maybe the last aspect to this is, once we brought multiple meditation groups to Nepal some years ago, in our training programs, and the first time I flew into Kathmandu, I saw Kathmandu at night. I came in at night on the plane, and then I looked down at the city, and I looked and I said, "Wow, it's amazing." I'm sitting on a plane. Let's say that's the sense of self. And I look at the city and I see these lights, like as how cities look like from the plane perspective. And then I see these dark patches. And I knew that in certain quarters, they turn off the electricity at night. So to save electricity. So you don't see lights. And I thought, wow, it's interesting. I'm sitting on the plane, like that's my sense of self. And I'm looking at the city, and I can't tell you if that's a lake, if that's a mountain, if that's a forest, or if that's a part of the city without light. So there might be 100,000 people living in this black area, and I cannot tell if they are there and what they are doing, because if there are people, they are doing something in there with candle lights and in their houses and whatever they do. So there is a process going on that I cannot have any awareness of. And then I thought, wow, that's a genius explanation of the human unconscious, that our nervous system turns off in traumatizing moments. We turn off the light, the conscious awareness, to not feel the intensity of fear, shame, pain, whatever, but that room stays dark. And the same intensity of pain and fear and shame and anything is still living there. And we need to learn how to support each other to turn those parts of our city on again, because otherwise, me as a sense of self of Thomas, I cannot feel what happens in certain parts of my body, even if I say that I feel my body, because I don't know what I don't feel.
Right.
And I think that's very important. We have the capacity as human beings to support each other, to become aware of those turned off quarters of the cities, and to release the processes in there in order to become more whole and less separate.